Hey KK, welcome back.
Thank you.
Hey, the FDA is now banning bulk sales of caffeine, and there's actually a warning about, and I think it's from the Consumer Protection Agency, about having too much green tea. Can you have too much of a great thing like coffee?
You definitely can. So, these are two really interesting stories looking at substances that typically most consumers, might have on a daily basis without any problem. The problem occurs when we get into much higher amounts than what the body can normally take. So, if we start with the pure caffeine powder, Dr. Mike, this is long overdue. There's been two documented deaths and probably a lot more that haven't been documented. When you look at some of these pure caffeine powder products, they tend to be maybe even have as much caffeine as 26 cups of coffee. Now, Dr. Mike, you love your coffee, but I'm sure you've never had 26 cups in a day. And if you did, that might not be a great choice. So, this is
Well, it's 26 cups in a really short period of time, right? It's all at once from the
yeah,
bulk.
once. So it's just this one pure kind of, you take this powder and then you get this jolt of just excessive caffeine, which can cause liver damage. It can cause heart arrhythmias. Again, as I've said, we've had some deaths. So
Actually, that's why I asked you about this topic because you're an expert on the liver from Skinny Liver.
that's right. I got
That's a
two livers
book.
today. But long overdue. But until that warning actually comes on or it's actually banned, obviously we would want consumers to stay away from pure caffeine powder as much as possible, not from coffee, but from the powders. If we move forward onto the green tea supplements, kind of the same type of situation here. So what we don't see is any problem with individuals actually drinking green tea, actually having the tea infusions, having tea drinks, things of that nature. Where the problem comes into is looking at the more supplemental forms where the antioxidants in these teas actually are much greater. That's when we might have some problematic issues coming up with consumers. So, bottom line on both of these stories is that eat the real food and stay away from the supplemental forms, and you're probably going to be just fine, if not better.
So, drink coffee or drink green tea, but the supplements of these, because they're concentrated, give you too much of a good thing
That's
and you
right.
can react to it. And both of them react by causing liver problems. I want to mention one more thing, if I can, about the subject. That is, we think of it as getting more antioxidants, but in fact, the antioxidants in food don't act as antioxidants inside your cells where they're needed. You only have three real antioxidants inside your cells: catalase, glutathione, and SOD. Those aren't spelled caffeine or theophylline from tea. They're spelled catalase, SOD, and glutathione. So the only way you get more of those inside your cell, yeah, there's some foods that increase them a little bit, and exercise does, but a lot of the things you do for health will increase the production of those naturally inside your cell. So food antioxidants, not the same as, if you will, the antioxidants inside your cells.
Hey, Dr. Mike.
Yes, KK.
As you know, I'm sitting here live talking to you every week now from Denver, Colorado, where I assume the air is better, but who knows? 95% of the world is breathing bad air. Could that be accurate? Am I one of those people? What's the deal?
Well, we in Cleveland have much worse air. We're one of the seven worst areas in the United States, it turns out. The best area in the United States, this is a test question, KK. Wasn't in the article. So, where's the best area for breathing good air in the United States?
Oh, Maine.
Hawaii.
Ah,
Hawaii. But in fact, the problem is the whole world is getting a little more polluted with air. You see this in Indian cities, you see it in Chinese cities, even in Great Britain and in London. The problem is it is even worse when you burn solid fuel inside your home, like wood, or charcoal or coal. So don't do those inside the home. If you're
Mhm.
going to use it for heat, like some people love these wood burning stoves for heat, close it up so that it goes out. But that pollutes your neighbor, so don't do that really either. So the best thing, learn to get, if you will, renewable fuels like solar and wind and use those for most of your activities. If you need it, natural gas, but and especially if you're burning something solid in your home, make sure it's well ventilated and your doors and windows are open. But the problem is outdoor air is getting more polluted. We've got to do something about it. Hey, KK, you're an
Yeah,
expert on liver because of that book, Skinny Liver. Wonderful book. Really
thank,
great. Well written, too.
thank you.
Um, Liver transplants, when I started, we had this great thing. You would have to get them cold perfused. You take this big machine on a plane, and you'd cold perfuse them right there, and they'd last maybe 12 hours before you had to do the transplant, but you tried to get them back to where you were really fast. Where I was at both the Cleveland Clinic and the University of Chicago, we did a lot of these. Then they went to just putting it in slush. They found out putting it in slush or ice was just as good as perfusing it with cold fluid. So you didn't have to take this big machine. You could just take a slush container, if you will, one of those cold chests, and put the livers in those. But now we say, hold the ice. What's the
Yeah.
story?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting story on my favorite organ, as you know. And so, what they have found is that if you actually were to take it out of the ice bath and put it in a more warm, nutrient dense bath, you would actually preserve many more livers and be able to use livers that typically have been discarded for liver transplants.
So let me make sure people understand. So we're comparing slushy ice livers put in slushy ice to keep them cool so they don't have a lot of metabolic activity of toxins versus they're perfused with warm blood.
Yep.
And the perfusion may be the key, but it's also the warmth is a key.
Yeah, exactly, because it mimics the body. And so when we have seen this in a study, it actually led to 20% more liver transplants, and perhaps even saving half of the livers that are discarded. So as we see liver transplantation unfortunately go up and the need for it go up with NAFLD, this could be a really big aspect that we can look at to get more people the livers that they're so desperately looking for.
Should we tell people what NAFLD is?
Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Right.
Uh,
So non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is probably the leading cause, and the leading book telling you how to treat it is, in fact, Kristen Kirkpatrick's, but is the leading cause of liver dysfunction now in America, and is causing quite a bit of it because as we get fatter as a country and as a population, we get more of the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So, want to prevent it? Start walking and get thinner.
Right. Concussions. So, Dr. Mike, a lot of discussions about concussions lately, especially because of the NFL and boxers and things like that related to Parkinson's disease. Is there new data out there that we could look at?
Well, this is an interesting study looking at all the veterans, 356,000 of them, who had a traumatic brain injury. And it turns out, whether it's a formal concussion or just a traumatic brain injury or any along the road, there's an increased risk of about 34% for mild traumatic brain injury, almost doubling for severe brain injury in developing Parkinson's disease post the injury. So, what we've learned is any concussion, any loss of consciousness, any problem, even if you recover from it quickly, can lead to later problems. That brain is a very delicate organ. So protect your brain, wear a helmet, don't do stupid things, and it may be that certain sports and sports where traumatic brain injuries are at risk are should be done in a different way. For women, the leading cause of traumatic brain injury isn't skiing, it's water aerobics. It's the what do you call it, where they synchronized water swimming, where
Uh,
and apparently in practice the kids kick one another in getting their feet and legs and arms and stuff in
wow.
the right positions, and that leads to concussion. So maybe it'll be soccer or something else, but it turns out it is right now. Daryl's son has it right. Bowling seems about the safest sport, if for those of you who consider bowling a sport.
What?
What? And a gasp from the audience.
Hey KK, you're out in Denver, so in addition to being an expert on how to make your liver skinny, you're going to be an expert, our pot expert. And
Well, they're surrounding me, Dr. Mike. The little green dispensary signs. It's really scary um, how easy it is to get it here because it's legal. And that then brings up a new study that has come out looking at how pot is actually impacting the teenage brain. So, this is a really interesting case review of about 69 cases looking at marijuana use in teenagers. Obviously, their brains are still developing. And what they have found is that those that are using tend to have lower scores on memory, being able to look at kind of their cognitive performance on tests, things of that nature. I think the most interesting part of this study was if they gave it up for just 3 days, those scores went back to normal. Their amount of brain of how they could use it, for lack of a better word, went back to normal. And so this is really quite interesting that there was such a great impact based on usage, but then such a huge significant improvement just 3 days out.
now we don't know from what I read on this that if you break for 3 days, then do it again, then break for 3 days. We don't know how long that recovery, whether that recovery gets faster or
That's,
prolongs over time, and we don't know the long-term effects. Is that right?
yeah, that's correct. Yes. So
So
there were
we've
things with
got a
this
lot more to learn about marijuana.
a lot.
One of the reasons it hasn't been studied as well is one, it isn't a formal drug yet, if you will. It isn't required by the to have the drug companies. So it's, and secondly, a plant in Colorado on the west side of Colorado or on the western Colorado may be very different than the one on the eastern shores of Colorado, if I can use shores in that way, eastern side. And third is because the FDA classifies it as a class 1 drug, it's very hard to study. That is, if a physician prescribes it, or the study goes across state lines, that's a felony every time you do that. So physicians, even in the states where medical marijuana is legal, based on our narcotics license, we have to recommend it, not prescribe it. And one thing, as you point out, that most of us are being very careful to do. I don't prescribe it at all, but most of us who look at it say that the people who are prescribing it should make sure that unless there's a really great medical indication, men under 25 and women under 20 should not chronically use, meaning more than once in a great while, once a week at most, marijuana, because it does destroy brain and brain functioning. The second component of that is if you're going to use it, since one joint equals 4 cigarettes in inflammatory process, you probably want to use the edibles, not the smoking it. Although it's a little less social doing the edibles, but we used to do it, oops, in my day. That is, in the days when I was in medical school, we used to see people do it by sharing brownies. They do brownies in Denver.
Lots of them. It's a problem actually because kids get their hands on the brownies and the gummy bears, and it's actually a real issue.
Um, So the basic message is don't use it more than once every 4 days, and if you can, wait till after 25 when you're a guy or after 20 when you're a woman.
So, Dr. Royson just read a disturbing review of endoscopes that are cleaned that actually may still be contaminated. That's really scary. What's that all about?
So this is scary. This is 3 hospitals in the U.S. were looked at in their practice of what the cleanliness of colonoscopes was and endoscopes. So these are the things that are put inside you when they do a colonoscopy or an endoscopy. Colonoscopy is inside your gut, colon, and intestine. You already have bacteria there. They found almost 80% of the colonoscopes were contaminated with bacteria or other live material from a prior patient. Scary. What you hope is that that prior patient was looked at as a routine, didn't have disease, and maybe gave you some healthy bacteria. That would be the best news. But in fact, this is going to change the practice. Even in the best hospital, it was around 30% of them were contaminated. Worse, the endoscopes, which go in the small ducts, which normally are sterile, well, those had about a 20%, maybe even a little higher contamination rate in these 3 hospitals. That's really scary. So, what's the message? We in medicine have to do better. We're patrolling ourselves. That's what this study shows. We're looking at it and we're saying, hey, whatever the recommendations were aren't good enough for your health. We're going to have to change and do better. Does that mean you shouldn't have a colonoscopy? No. It does mean, though, that you want to kind of question the people about their practices to make sure they're really good practices. And maybe you should be the first one in the morning so at least they've had time to dry overnight.